Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Garrity of National Review, also the co-author of Heavy Lifting. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today, as usual. And, Jim, we start with the good. And while most of our podcast today will once again deal with the aftermath of the terrorist attack in San Bernardino, we're going to start with domestic politics, although it does have a little bit of a connection to the attacks from Wednesday. The United States Senate, an institution we have not put in the good martini a lot this year, is definitely in the good martini today for actually showing that it's ready to play at least a little bit of hardball on some of the critical issues that it promised it would take action on prior to the 2014 midterm elections, through the tactic of reconciliation, which is the same tactic by which Obamacare was passed. Big chunks of Obamacare were repealed in the legislation, including the individual mandate, employer mandate, Cadillac tax, and a bunch of other things. And so that's on the table. They also, through the same method, defunded Planned Parenthood, and they also shot down a bunch of liberal attempts to add gun control legislation. Now, of course, the president's going to veto it, and they don't have the votes to override the vetoes, but this is a pretty far cry from Mitch McConnell a few weeks ago on Planned Parenthood saying, well, we don't have 67 votes, so why bother? Good job, Senate.
Yeah, this is in fact exactly what a lot of conservatives who were very frustrated with Mitch McConnell and previously very frustrated with John Boehner, they had their frustration with the fact that nothing was getting to the president's desk. They knew the president was not going to sign conservative initiatives into law. They knew that they were not going to get a lot of conservative reforms enacted under this president, but the plan, and certainly was implied by the rhetoric in the 2014 midterms, was give us a Republican Senate and we will send a lot of stuff to Obama's desk that he does not want to sign. He's going to veto it, he's going to pay the price, and we will set the stage and we will set the agenda for a Republican president to take office in 2017. We will give the country a sneak preview of what they could expect, and all these popular pieces of legislation will come through. Didn't happen until very recently. They did it with the Keystone Pipeline, and then it kind of stopped. And this is a nice big step. Look, and keep in mind, no harm has been done, right? The government's not shut down. You know, the earth is not crashing into the sun. You know, like, this is working. Now, there are going to be people who will be frustrated if eventually we get an omnibus and this stuff gets stripped out in order to avoid a government shutdown. But you know what? Look, this is what the plan was. And I salute the Senate for getting its act together. And it's a nice start to the Paul Ryan era and in the Republican House.
On to the bad martini now, and this is breaking news as we record here late on Friday morning Eastern Time. This is the CNN write-up of the story. Investigators think that as the San Bernardino, California attack was happening, female shooter Tashfeen Malik posted a pledge of allegiance to ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi on Facebook. 3 U.S. officials familiar with the investigation told CNN, and every other major media outlet is reporting this now as well. Her post was made on an account with a different name, according to one U.S. official. They did not explain how they knew that she made the post. Jim, the story goes on to say that it looks like this post was made just prior to the attack at the regional center there, and authorities say right now it looks like it was more inspired by ISIS than officially directed by ISIS, but I think we're pretty darn close to our terrorism designation here.
There are two things. There's one, I mean, raise your hand if you're surprised by this. The idea of somebody who commits a terror attack, who recently came in from Saudi Arabia, born in Pakistan, had an IED factory in her home, gave up her child, and then went and shot a whole bunch of people. The idea of that person having any interest in ISIS is not that shocking or surprising. Two things that do kind of jump out about this. The first is that as this was going on, CBS News went to the White House to do an interview with President Obama. These first couple reports about a shooting in San Bernardino would come out. In addition to the rather bothersome and very wrong argument that the President Obama had talked about with gun control, President Obama was also asked about ISIS, made comments that I think look really foolish right now. Among them, ISIL is not going to pose an existential threat to us. They are a dangerous organization like Al-Qaeda was, but we have hardened our defenses. Quote, and this is the important part, Greg, our homeland has never been more protected by more effective intelligence and law enforcement professionals at every level than they are now. Then he goes on a little bit further and he says, we just have to keep things in perspective. They can kill some innocent people, but that's not a victory for them if we respond appropriately, Mr. Obama said. So he's basically saying how confident he is that the homeland is protected from an ISIS attack while ISIS is attacking the American homeland. Literally, it is going on as he's telling us how safe we are. This is Chip Diller at the end of Animal House saying, remain calm, all is well. And you realize that this is the guy who said contained and JVT, this constant theme of downplaying the threat and saying, we've got this, don't worry, we're protected. So moments ago, I point this out. I'm saying, look, while an attack is going on, he's saying, don't worry, we're protected from these sorts of attacks in the homeland. The argument was that it doesn't count. This attack was not directed by ISIS. So, Greg, apparently it only counts if it comes from ISIS high command. They didn't fill out the proper paperwork to make this an official ISIS attack, so it's not really an ISIS attack, even though she pledged her loyalty to ISIS as she was undergoing this attack. Is there a filing deadline for this to,
Speaking of paperwork, you do a great job in this morning's Morning Jolt pointing out that she came last year from Saudi Arabia and, of course, had to fill out all the paperwork required by the Department of Homeland Security, as mentioned just a moment ago. And apparently she came through with flying colors, which suggests, Jim, that sometimes when people come to the United States, either they do get radicalized later, but sometimes they might lie on the form.
It's almost as if terrorists are dishonest, Greg. This happens right after the White House was telling us the Department of Homeland Security had the best defenses humanly possible to keep terrorists out from sneaking in amongst refugees.
Yes.
If this wasn't life and death, horrible, tragic, abominable circumstances, Greg, it would almost be funny that every time Obama says something can't happen, it immediately happens. It's just like he has the worst timing in the entire world. The same way, it used to be he would say the economy is getting better and then we get new bad numbers coming out. Or Al Gore used to say, we have to be aware of global warming, and then all of his conferences kept getting snowed out.
Right.
Every once in a while, reality gets really angry at naive liberals, and it decides to punish them. And this has just been kind of maddening. I think it illustrates the level of denial here. And then there's his other comment about how, well, they can kill some innocent people, but it's not a victory for that. Well, it sure feels like a victory if you're one of the innocent people killed, or it's one of your family members, or somebody you know. It's a remarkably if President Bush had ever said anything like this, we already would have started impeachment proceedings. I mean, it's just a baffling psychological disassociation on the part of the president here. This has been an exhausting week of news, Greg, and it's been really bothersome to see this administration just remain so steadfast in its denial and naivete about the threat we face.
Exhausting is a good way to put it. All right, don't put away your logic translator.
They're waiting for us, Greg. Maybe that crazy Martini will reassure our faith in our governing leaders.
No, not going to happen. As we mentioned, the Senate yesterday pushed back on a couple of Democratic efforts to add gun control amendments to the legislation. But that doesn't mean Democrats are done talking about this. Chuck Schumer led a press conference on this yesterday. And a reporter asked a question that California Senator Barbara Boxer thought was akin to, this isn't going to happen. It might not actually make any difference if you do pass it, so why bother? And Barbara Boxer decided to use California as the example for why we need stronger federal gun laws.
In California, since the 90s, we have passed a number of important gun safety laws. And over that period of time, we've had a reduction in gun violence of 56%. Now, clearly, what we see is this is not enough. That's why we need national laws. That's why I'm looking forward to Senator Feinstein's reintroduction of some form of her assault weapon ban. But the fact is, sensible gun laws work. We've proven it in California, and we're not going to give up.
Gun laws work. They've been proven in California. Jim, I'm pretty sure they have laws against assault rifles and high-capacity magazines that worked out really well.
Laws against pipe bombs also worked very well, didn't they? I've been calling for a 7-day waiting period before you purchase a pipe bomb. It's not that the government wants to take your pipe bomb. They just want you to register it with the government, or you can't sell a slightly used pipe bomb. Barbara Boxer, we never come to expect, clear thinking or good sense for her. But you realize that she cites the decline in crime as a sign that the gun laws are working. So during the same time period, we've had this giant this growth in the number of people who own guns, right? So that can't be the reason. It can only be that the gun laws that have been. Simultaneously, she says the laws have worked, and thus we need more of them, which doesn't make any sense. Either they worked or they didn't. The third element there is this idea that if there's not a terror attack, that invalidates the argument that gun control works. If there is a terror attack, that doesn't invalidate the argument that gun control works. It's a really fascinating kind of twisty pretzel logic that she exhibits there. Just think, California, you could have had Carly Fiorina instead. Good call, California. Good call.
Can you just imagine these two sitting around their IED-laden apartment going, it's a good thing there's no federal laws against this, because I'm not worried about the state laws, but the federal laws I'd really be worried about.
Praise Allah, praise Wayne LaPierre. At least in the eyes of the New York Daily News, yes. Yeah.
On that note, Jim.
The week's over, everyone. See you next week.
Join us Monday. I'm Greg Corombos. He's Jim Garrity. Join us Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.